3 KB HQs were following Bolkovitinov's regiment. As soon as Vasiliev's tank crossed the bridge at Krasny, shells flew into it from the left. Apparently, the Germans sought to seize the bridge to cut off the division's escape routes. Bolkovitinov's regiment had already had time to turn around, was going to attack. It was too late to bring him back. Approached the 2nd Regiment. Vasiliev ordered it to move after him, and he himself stood at full height behind the turret, and, having deployed the headquarters KB, led them in the attack. The tankers of the 2nd Regiment, seeing the commander rushing to the attack, pressed the gas to the limit, jumped over the bridge, and turning around, overtook him. But Vasiliev remained standing in full view of everyone until the Germans were knocked down to the river. I was surprised that he tells about it with admiration. It was good that the Germans had no infantry, and if they had the first machine gunner would have taken off the commander. So I told the delegate about it. Yes, he agreed. Communication failed. It turns out that Vasiliev tried to call before the attack on the radio regimental commanders, but for some reason could not call. He sent out a Pakachnik and operatives of the headquarters. They found the regimental commanders after the battle. That's why the colonel and had to manage the battle by personal example. Of course I thought the colonel's personal bravery has done a lot, but still parts of the division fought independently, each at his own risk. There was no common management of them. So it turns out the bravery and the soldiers and commanders have a lot of courage, but not enough organization. It was about 10 p.m. when the commander and I arrived at the division headquarters, located on the northern outskirts of Buke. Vasiliev, who was interrogating a captured German officer, said that now the chief of staff should come and we would get the packets. In the meantime, sit down. The prisoner Oberleutnant, adjutant of the commander of the tank regiment, a young, already greying German, speaks Russian well, which he learned in his youth, when he worked somewhere in Russia as a mechanical engineer. He stands at attention. He answers questions cheekily, sometimes ironically. Tell me, the colonel asks him. Do you know why Germany is at war against Russia? I do, he replies. Why? The Führer ordered it. That's not an explanation. I want to know the motives. The Führer has declared the motives, says the prisoner. They must be known to you. And in general, I wonder why you, a Russian colonel, did not ask me first of all what regiment and what division I am, but ask irrelevant political questions. I am not a politician, I am an ordinary German officer. 2 months before the war one knew you from your card, I knew that you were Vasiliev, commander of a tank division, participated in the Finnish and Mongolian campaigns, awarded the highest order. I know all your regimental commanders. I know your chief of intelligence. And who do you know from the German senior officers? I knew every 2 hours yesterday where your division was, and you didn't even know that we were coming to intercept you. He suddenly turns to me and asks, What time is it? Perplexed, but still looking at my watch, I answer, Exactly 0:30. You see, Mr. Colonel, says the German, there is a difference of 4 minutes on your watch. It is 0:34. He nods at Vasiliev's watch. Vasiliev does not move, does not remove the hand lying on the back of the chair. The watch is in front of the prisoner's eyes. The German raises his voice. Is it possible to fight like this? You've already lost the war. I don't understand how Vasiliev can indifferently listen to this self-righteous barking. What is he thinking about? Why is he looking at the prisoner? I think he's embarrassing himself. The German wipes the sweat from his face with a silk handkerchief, and, as if having realized it, stretches out in front of Vasiliev again. There is an oppressive silence in the room. But here Vasiliev shifts his gaze from the prisoner to the cleanly scraped dining table and pronounces still evenly. I think that the expensive file cabinet of your agent intelligence will let you down. You have our picture cards, but you have no knowledge of us. I will not convince you of that, of course, you will soon see for yourself. Vasiliev rose from his chair, quickly straightened his uniform, and looked at the prisoner point blank. The task of your division. The prisoner drew himself up, as if expecting a whiplash. I don't know anything. I swore an oath to the Führer, he mumbled. I don't care about that, Vasiliev cut him short. Tell me. I don't know. Vasiliev turned abruptly and sharply ordered the escorts. Take them out. The German immediately lost all his arrogance. Don't. I'll tell you, he shrieked, trying to grab the colonel's arm. Vasiliev put his hands behind his back. Will you tell me? He grinned. Ah, but no one here would say it if you cut him to pieces. Don't worry, we don't kick anyone lying down. While the Chief of Staff came, I had time to familiarize myself with the situation. It turns out that today we defeated the vanguard of the Light Tank Division, the cover of Kleist's army, the main blow which is aimed at Dubno-Kremenets. Having talked to the Chief of Staff, Vasiliev called me. A liaison will go to the army headquarters, he said. I have another task for you. Keep in mind that the task I set you personally. By 4 o'clock in the morning I must know where the German tanks have gone across the river and where they are trying to force the bug. By the way, he smiled. Put your watch on my watch. Let them not confuse the Germans. Already leaving the headquarters, I realized that Vasiliev did not even a word hinted at how to fulfill the task, leaving me to map out the route and find ways to extract information. To find ways to get information. I remembered his tone when he had set the task. Apparently, it didn't occur to him that it might be difficult for me. Strangely, he seems to have more confidence in me than I do. I'm afraid my accidental success has given me an undeserved fighting reputation. Maybe I should have told Vasiliev I wasn't a line commander after all. Where to start reconnaissance north of Krasny or south, crossing the Western Bug or its tributary. The Germans could bypass us both from the north, to Brody, and from the south. Wouldn't it be more profitable to start the reconnaissance bypass from the south, forcing a rivulet at Krasny along the railroad track, and get to the highway to Kamenka? This way, albeit long, but as if safe, I will find myself in the very area from where the Germans began their attack in the evening, from where artillery fire is still coming. I guess so I am encouraged and decide that first of all I must find a guide who knows the area well. Grandfather Titok, who I took as a guide in one of the outskirts of the village, a talkative and vivacious-looking old man, immediately became numb when the car shook under him. At every jerk he crossed himself, opening his mouth in horror. The grandfather is still old regime, Nikitin disappointedly noted. Technics is afraid of technology. Our Kolkhoznik would have gone into the engine compartment long ago and would have been bored with questions, what's up? But this one only trembles, as if he were put on a dragon. Artillery fire is raging far to our right. It's the Germans hitting our division. And near us not a sound, not a living soul. Only 2 aft stoplights of our sentries flicker in the darkness ahead. We crossed the creek on the railroad bed. Kutkosh was left behind, ahead of Zuriti, where the Germans should be. Bridge. Bridge. Suddenly our guide woke up and moved forward, looking into the darkness. The cars are coming, barely rewinding the tracks. Muffled humming engines were slightly heard. In the coastal thicket began to go downhill, stretched the hedge of the farm. A cow rumbled in the yard. A dog howled somewhere in the neighborhood. With difficulty they found the owner. He said that neither the Germans nor ours had crossed the bridge. Nevertheless, having darkened the stoplights, let a sentry car on the bridge. There was no enemy in the vicinity, and I turned along the river in the direction where I expected to meet him. On the opposite eastern bank of the rivulet were glowing fires, traces of yesterday's battle. Here, in the thick meadow grass, in the bushes, countless tracks of German tanks. So we are in the location of the Germans. But why still not a living soul? Left German tank. Nikitin shouts to me. Above the top of the bush protrudes the turret of a German tank. I hit the turret. Not a sound in response. Only from across the river, where our division is located, a dozen shells flew to us. And again, dead silence. I'm approaching an enemy tank. Its caterpillar is broken. There are 2 of my holes in the turret. The cannon is intact, but the lock's been removed. The tank must have been abandoned. In the neighboring bush, an abandoned all-terrain vehicle, its engine glares with dark pupils of empty candle holes. But where have the Germans gone? To the south to Lvov, or to the west, back to Kamenka? Where to go? I asked Krivulia. Follow the tracks, follow the tracks. Grandfather Titok, sitting on the stern of my car, intervened. E.g. dared grandfather, exclaimed Nikitin. A hunter smells game. Having bypassed the village of Derevliany, we hid at the edge of the forest and began to watch the highway, which from Kamenka goes to Derevliany, to the Bug. The traces of German tanks had already turned to Derevliany, and small columns of vehicles were passing along the highway from the west. Sometimes tractors dragged guns behind them. But what's the matter? Why not a single car does not show up on the eastern side of the village? They're going over the Bug. They put a bridge in the village, says Grandfather Titok confidently. Yes, it can't be otherwise. So the Germans want to bypass us to the north and through Yablonivka to go further to Tugorov or to Brody. In fact, the task was accomplished. I already knew where the Germans were going and where they were forcing the Bug, but German vehicles were too dainty in front of us on the highway. Let's put the German columns in order, Krivulia suggested. We decided, if we could, to take a prisoner by raid. As soon as a black truck came out from behind the corner of the grove and flashed in my sight, I fired. It caught fire, drove off into the ditch and fell over sideways. Krivuli's cannon boomed nearby. Another truck, dragged by inertia, got stuck in a ditch and caught fire. I burst onto the highway. Overtaking me, the rest of the tanks are rushing by. They crushed the tractor pulling the cannon. The Germans scattered in the rye, only their backs flashing. Taking the wounded driver from the head car, I rushed to the tail of the column, from where Krivulia is waving to me. He is standing by the car, pulling out of it a wounded officer. Not far away lies crushed by him Opel. In the window I can see the twisted epaulet of the colonel and velvet buttonholes. I can't get inside the car. Well, I'll at least take the colonel's insignia as physical evidence, I decide. Shells are flying at us from Derevliana. There is no reason to delay any longer. We turn the cars around and rush back. On potholes and bumps, when my tank makes jumps, Grandfather Titok cries out, "Oh Jesus!" and clutches the turret with his hands. His face, the colour of yoofed leather, turned grey and stretched out, his white lips whispering something. Look! Look! Nikitin breaks me, our grandfather has gone mad. I climb over to the stern and sit next to my grandfather at the tower. What's wrong with you, Grandpa Titok? If I had known, I would not have led, he crosses himself and looks at the prisoners sitting next to him with horror. We are approaching Krasna on the highway. The ground rumbles with explosions. Groups of yellow-bellied bombers with crosses on their wings are passing overhead. Krasny is on fire. Grandfather Titok, forgetting that he is riding on a tank, straightens up to his full height. He must have noticed his burning house among dozens of others. We are riding among two walls of fire. Houses are burning, cars are burning, flames are licking the sky. At a bend, I don't have time to stop the car. Grandfather jumps from the tank to the ground, jumps up and, falling down on one leg, runs to the outermost burning houses. Here he stops, stands hunched over, then shouts something, shouting his fist at the sky. In Krasna we were met by the chief of intelligence. Learning that I was carrying prisoners, he ordered me to hand them over to him and come to the Corps headquarters. It turned out that Vasiliev is here, just arrived. I found him talking with Ryabyshev and P.O. Pell. The reconnaissance is back, he said when he saw me in the hay. Well, where are the Germans? I report the Germans left at night over the Bug, near the village of Derevliany, masking their withdrawal with artillery fire, and came to the highway to Peruv-Brody, north of us. The results of the interview with the prisoners reported by the staff commander confirmed my data. The prisoners are from the artillery regiment of the same light tank division with which we fought yesterday. The division is going to Brody and must seize it by 10 a.m. on June 25th and close the roads to Dubno. North of it comes the 14th Panzer Division of the same Kleist's army. Now I already understand something about the situation. The Germans are definitely coming to intercept us. Will we be able to outrun them at Brod? I waited to see what my superiors would say. All three of us stood in silence. Suddenly Popple made a funny sound, as if he wanted to say something, but he realized and swallowed the words ready to burst from his lips. His swarthy face, with its large black eyes, lit up with a smile that once seen and never forgotten. "Everything is clear here," said the smile more eloquently than words. "Don't you think, Comrade Lieutenant General, that this Mr. Kleist, may he be in trouble, is going on an adventure?" he said with a funny Ukrainian accent. The general looked at him incredulously. "How is this to be understood?" he asked. "It seems to me that he wants to tie up our corps with his cover, this unfortunate division, and the main forces to jump out through Brody to Kremenets." "Unless his main forces are really in the Brody area," said Ryabyshev evasively. "And what do you think?" he asked Vasiliev. Vasiliev said that he agrees with Popple, and justified his opinion by the fact that south of us tank parts of the enemy is not seen, and to the north, in addition to the one with which we dealt with, another division is coming. After hearing Vasiliev, Ryabyshev thought and immediately began to give orders. "Corps, since 5 in the morning, continues to march. The defence is occupied with the exit to the area of Brod. The corps commander is worried about the division going east of us. It got lost on the march and still won't let us know about it. The general himself goes to find it and give it the task to go to the area of Brod. He orders Vasiliev to pull out his regiments immediately. Our route goes through the forests through Wierzbiany, Angeloka, Olesko, Jasno, Brody. On this route from Olesko to Brody, the whole corps will go one way, as there are swamps on the left and many small bridges not passable for heavy tanks. Today I learned something about our corps commanders, and it gave me an opportunity to understand the relationship between Ryabyshev and Popple. Together they work recently. At every step it is felt that they are looking at each other. Ryabyshev is in his 60s. In the First World War he fought as a soldier. In the Civil War, very quickly promoted, commanded a cavalry corps. He's a new man in the tank forces. He took over our corps shortly before the war. Maybe that's why, as it seems to me, he feels not quite free, although he is a man of great military fame. Popple in the Civil War was also a cavalryman, but in the tank troops from the first days of their existence in the Soviet Union. It can be seen that he knows the technique very well, better than Ryabyshev, but when they are together, this superiority is imperceptible, at least it does not strike the eye. I understood their relationship as follows: Popple advises very carefully, and Ryabyshev cautiously accepts advice. It's amazing how Popple changes in conversation. When he is silent, look at him and think stern, unapproachable, but only says a word, you can immediately see that a cordial, soft man. They say that phlegmatic people are not able to work, but Popple, in my opinion, in everyday life is clearly phlegmatic, but when he works, the energy in him beats like a key. This time the first company went on a reconnaissance. We were given half an hour's rest. We snored together. Krivula had to work hard to wake up the crews, including me. We're in the second echelon with the division headquarters. The sky is still calm, the forest too. By 10 o'clock, the first echelon Bolkovitinov's regiment in the area of Yasenyuv met with a reconnaissance party of the German light tank division, which bypassed Brody from the south and cut our road. Bolkovitinov overturned this detachment with a heavy battalion, drove it into swamps and forests, and continued moving to Brody. The drivers of the cars that meet us say that the Germans are already on the western outskirts of Brody. I received the task to go out with a platoon of my company in a reconnaissance patrol, to conduct reconnaissance in the direction of Brody, Chervonormysk and Komarovka village before meeting the enemy. On the right side of the highway to Dubno is our reconnaissance group, and ahead should be parts of the 2 Mekorps. I overtook the first echelon already near Brody, which was bombed by German aviation. Then it went towards our division. Brody and Chervonormysk are packed with all kinds of troops. Behind Chervonormysk, single trenches of infantry. There are separate groups of fighters going through the woods. At the chapel in front of the bridge over the Sitenka River, 2 light armoured cars. I asked the lieutenant, looking cautiously over the river, "Who are they?" It turns out that they are reconnaissance of one of the corps, which, according to the intelligence information of our division headquarters, should be ahead of us. I learn from the lieutenant that his corps is withdrawing to the left flank. And who's ahead? I ask. There are no Germans. There are Germans in Komorówka, he says uncertainly. So much for the intelligence. I move out to the northern edge of the forest, and from there I keep watch over Komorówka. There is some strange movement there, but no Germans are visible. Far to the right and left you can hear the rumble of masses of vehicles. From the northwest corner of the forest jump out 2 tanks. The edge of the forest is holding the direction to us. By the characteristic fast running and nose rocking I recognize BT. They are literally covered with tankers. I go out to meet them. The tanks stopped abruptly. A tanker jumped out of the turret of the front one and headed towards me. Those sitting on the armour scattered around the vehicles. "Hey, who are you?" asked the tanker who came up to me. From under the wide resin eyebrows, crossed on the bridge of his nose, inflamed eyes looked at me. Such eyes I saw in comrades, loaders of our artel, after 3 days of orals in the port of Mariupol, when we saved the country gold rubles, which had to pay for the downtime of foreign ships. "And who are you?" I asked and involuntarily smiled. He looked at me very warily, not taking his right hand out of the pocket of his Kurzovy jacket with a burnt hollow and sleeve. It must have been because I smiled that his wariness disappeared at once, and he shouted cheerfully to those who remained at the tanks. "They are our own." Then he turned around again, took his hand out of his pocket and trustingly extended it to me. Politruk Samylov. I introduced myself. "What unit?" I asked him. "Colonel Anikushkin's division. Have you heard of it?" "No, I haven't heard of it." "What kind of paratroopers are these?" I asked, pointing at the tankers. The Germans burned their tanks, and they barely escaped on 2 of them. When I saw you, I thought, that's it. Got in the crosshairs. "How could there be Germans here?" I asked. My irony didn't get through to him. "Where from?" "Over there in that village we drove right up to them, and barely escaped. You don't believe me? Ask Major Ustinov." He pointed to one of his group. "He is the chief of communications of our division, and will not lie." The unexpectedness of his argument made me laugh, although the news was far from cheerful. So much for the 2 corps ahead again, I thought, and aloud said, "Where is your division?" "That's what I wanted to ask you." "What do you mean?" And so, you see, we went from Radzichów to look for the headquarters of the front, or Corp me, and Major Ustinov. He's got nothing to do anyway. There's no radio communication, so the commander sent him with me to fix it. We drove, we stopped in Tarnopol. The commander is there. You see, there's a map hanging all over the wall. Major Ustinov reports the commander marks on the map. I see that there's a sack drawn on it with a blue pencil, and our division is at the bottom of the sack. Then I thought our business is tobacco. The commander says the situation is serious, take the order, I want to see the commander in the evening. We arrive, we give the order. The commander reads it, says we have to look for the corps. He sends us again. We're on our way again. It's night all around. We found the village where the corps stood. We arrived Germans. We scratched ourselves a little. We broke their armoured car. We're going back, the sun is rising. We're approaching Radzichów. There's a column of broken tanks on the highway. What an evil joke, I think. But the major is already shouting Germans on the left, tanks I shoot, 2 were hit. I turn around, we're moving away, and a shell hit me in the side. The car was on fire. The major and I jumped out, the mechanic was gone. I put on a gas mask, went into the fire, fumbled for my belt, grabbed it, and pulled out the mechanic. Together we ran into the forest. I see 2 BTS from our reconnaissance battalion in the forest, and the crews from the burned tanks are on them. We sat down and drove through the woods. We came out here. And now where? I don't know where my division went, and he sighed heavily. I said that I saw many tanks in Chervonormysk. They must be ours, rejoiced the political officer. Look, friends, the Germans are near. He shouted goodbye, and his tanks disappeared into the forest. In vain I looked through binoculars at the outskirts of the visible village. I saw nothing. The village seemed to have died out, and suddenly a shrill whistle sounded above us, as if the wind blew through the treetops. The second whistle blew, and the forest, slumbering in the midday heat, shuddered from the explosions. Flight. Run with Nikitin to the tank. From the hatch shows the head of Viper. He whistled and disappeared under the soundly slammed lid. Only we had time to jump into the turret, as a new volley of mines showered our tanks. We return fire. The anti-tank battery is hitting us now. We're retreating behind the bridge over Satinka. I decide to hold the bridge until the approach of the division. My radio overcame the distance and contacted the headquarters. I report where I am and where the enemy is. Meanwhile, his light tanks are boldly approaching the guarded bridge. This, by the way, complements my information to the division. And the first two tanks, trying to cross the bridge, remain on it, hit by us. The rest are fighting to retreat into the woods. Soon the combat guard came and replaced us. We went to Brody, where, as we were told, the division headquarters was located. Through the place there was a continuous column of tanks, vehicles with infantry and artillery. These were parts of our division, mixed with parts of the division, which at night went to look for the corps commander. Here he is. I saw him at the crossroads, at the town hall, among the adjusters directing the units along their roads. Familiar divisional vehicles were parked at the town hall. Deciding that here was the division headquarters, I ran into the building. In the first side room, on a chair by the mirror, sat a small, tightly bunched commander. He was grunting and puffing from the spray of cologne hissing in his face, which was used by a tall, bent-in-an-arc barber. Clap. Without turning around, called me sitting commander, taking, apparently for his orderly. Now get a clean shirt and let's change. I immediately recognized Popple by his voice and stepped towards him, confused by surprise, but he shouted at me. Not here, but in the next room, you fool. Why do you need laundry without a bath? Surprised the barber. Odd man. What a bath. Before the battle it is important to put on clean underwear, and to wash yourself in heaven. They will wash you, said Popple, rising from his chair. I went up to him and reported that I was looking for the division headquarters. It's not here, Popple exclaimed. It's on the right side of the road to Chervonormysk, in the forest. Having found out that I was on a reconnaissance mission, he began to ask me in detail where I had seen the Germans and where and which of our units I had met. In farewell, he said. Tell the boys there, don't let them get ready for the big fight. Returning back, I saw him standing at the crossroads at the place of Rybyshev. He was sorting the column, directing the units in different directions to their defence areas. Today I have a good day. On my way to the headquarters of my division, to the right of the highway to Leshnyov, in a sparse forest, I came across the headquarters of Major General Baranov's Metavision. In the slender, lean, trim Major General I recognized my former battalion commander from the tank school, Colonel Baranov. He also recognized me, smiled with the edges of his closed lips, and, calling me to him, extended his hand. How do you feel, my pupil? He asked, looking me over. I'm not a fish out of water yet, I confessed. There are many things I don't understand. I believe you, he said warmly. When I was a young lieutenant in 1914 on the German front, everything seemed incomprehensible to me, some confusion, a mess, I think. I'll be lost here. It was a bit scary, but then I figured out what was going on, and I became a fighting officer. I got acquainted with the Golden George. When he found out that I was a commander in a tank division and not a technician, he admonished me. We build equipment, we build, we fight, we fight. That's how a Soviet man should be. You did the right thing, support the honor of our school. After that meeting I felt warm at heart, as if I had seen my father. I remembered all the conversations I had had during the day and thought, if you look at what's going on from the outside, you'll think it's panic, everyone is rushing somewhere, the roads are full of cars, people are wandering back and forth, looking for something, but if you look closer, Talk to people. You'll see that there's no panic in the army. That the situation is, of course, complicated, difficult. The situation is very unclear. But most people are calm, like Krivulia, who is sure that everything will change soon. Two circumstances do not bode well for us. First, instead of the staunch defence of Mech Corps, under the cover of which we must concentrate for the offensive, we catch the rear guard of their retreating units. Second, the march and concentration of our corps in the initial area took place in full view of German planes, which continuously bombed us until darkness fell, and only its graceful shade gave the mixed units the opportunity to sort out and occupy their areas of defence. Everyone feels that tomorrow will be the first real offensive, a real big battle. My company is in a fever. Each crew is digging into their tank. Sledgehammers are knocking out the fingers of the caterpillar. There is the engine howling during a test start after adjustment. There is the engine fan howling, which stubbornly refuses to start. Everywhere run throaty technicians, followed by gasoline tankers. By midnight, the fever subsides. Krivulia and I are sitting in the tank, having closed the hatches and turned on the side lamp. Krivulia is shaving, trying to see himself in the narrow metal mirror of the triplex, which holds only 1/4 of his face, and I am waiting for my turn. After me, 2 more crews have to shave with the same razor, and in the meantime they change their underwear and hem their collars. Krivulia demands that everyone prepare for tomorrow the way they prepare for great feasts. "What are you doing all this for?" I ask Krivulia, holding the belt for straightening the razor. "Why, of course." He was surprised. "Fighting for a soldier is, brother, a feast of honour, and since it is so, then everyone should show up for it in proper form. You know better than I do," he finished abruptly. I confessed to him that it was new to me. Hey, it's nothing new. And the main thing, it is very important in sanitary terms, clean underwear, in case of wounding, is better than dirty. You will not infect the wound. I take up the freed razor shaving. I think that I am still green in the war. I don't know elementary things. The tankers have already gathered around our vehicle, waiting for their turn to shave. I hear a lively conversation. Krivulia shares with the crews the experience of fighting in Finland. "The main thing in the attack is not to hustle at the enemy like on oxen," he says, "but that the machine rushed from side to side, like a mad horse. This maneuver in the open is the only salvation for the tank, until you reach cover. But don't forget the fire. Remember, throw to the side and fire where the enemy shoots at you. From the move is difficult to hit the first time," says Zubov. "It doesn't matter that you can't hit from the first time," Krivulia convinces him. "When the enemy has one and another shell whizzing over your head, it's not easy for him to catch you in the crosshairs. The enemy, brother, also has a nut that comes off easily. I'll tell you, the Finnish soldier is very stubborn, and even then I captured a cannon and its crew near Viborg." Tankers ask Krivulia to tell how it happened. "Very simple," he says. "We jumped out of the woods to attack the village. I see that a cannon hit me from a ruined barn and missed a miss. I sent a shell there, counted in my mind to 10, as my petty officer advised me before the attack, and threw the tank to the right 45 degrees. Only I manoeuvred. I see a second shell ricochet to the left. I the return shell and again count 10 and manoeuvre to the left. On the 4th manoeuvre I hit the cannon and knocked out the whole crew. Then, when I put the wounded Finns on the tank, their lieutenant said to me, I just take the sight, shoot, look, and the tank disappears in the sight. I have to turn the gun. God himself protects you." "Not God," I said, "but the petty officer." "It doesn't matter that he's not a god, but for the tank, Comrade Politruk, you should pray to him morning and evening," says Viper. "Now hold on," shouts to me Krivulia. "Tomorrow your mechanic will be so tossing the car from side to side that you won't find where the west is and where the east is." When I shaved, the conversation was already going on that on the ground with the Germans tomorrow we can cope, but the aviation perhaps will give light, as Nikitin put it. Krivuli also had a case in Finland. "Who hasn't seen the MiGs?" he asks. "We have. They all say only fluff flies from the Junkers. Soon the sky will be clear, but we can't count on it tomorrow. We must have our own tactics and practice. Everyone was very interested in what this tactics practice was. I had such a case in Finland, continues Krivulia. They didn't see any aviation, and suddenly on the day of our offensive there was German aviation, but the pilots were Finnish. The Germans are now bombing in a cluster, but the Finns are not. A Finn chooses a tank, and until he bombs or uses up his bombs, he will not leave. It was an attack on an open field. We had just come out of the forest and a light bomber followed me. I shouted to the mechanic that the plane was chasing us. The mechanic was not a brave guy, it was his first time in an attack. Obviously he was in no hurry and stayed behind everyone. That's why we were favoured by this Finn. My mechanic was scared and went full speed ahead. I'm watching the plane. It comes out of the dive, I see that the bomb has already come off, and at that very moment my car suddenly stopped at full speed at some pit, almost tipped over the nose. The bomb exploded about 50 meters ahead. I liked it. I told the mechanic that if I demanded a stop at high speed, he should do exactly the same as in front of this pit, right with a mountain brake. Only we bypassed the pit and gained speed. The airplane dives at me again. I look the bomb brakes off. I command the mechanic stop. The bomb exploded again in front. Well, I think the calculation is correct. The pit helped. Thanks to her, taught me something good. I got 4 bombs out of that plane. He flew away with nothing. That's what tactical practice is all about. It doesn't require any special wisdom, just cohesion and attention. Krivulia finishes. I remember how I was annoyed by his stories about Odessa life, my thoughts about him, and I think you can be so wrong about a man. At night we received an order to attack. The task is to reach the eastern bank of the river Styr in the area of Plyashova-Beresteko and cut the enemy highways going to Dubno by the end of June 26th. We are advancing on the left flank of Ryabyshev, in the strip Krupets, Setenka, the river Plazoka and Sestritin, Koroloka, Beresteko. The neighbouring units on the left, commanded by Major General Meshanin, are advancing along the highway to Lesnio, Beresteko, cooperating with the corps of General Carpizo. The beginning of the offensive was scheduled for 10 a.m. By that time the division units were to reconnoitre the crossings across the swampy Setenka River in the area of the forest chapel and the villages of Setenka and Osinova, which were defended by the enemy from the northern, forest, bank of the river. From the reconnaissance the commanders returned before sunrise. The commander ordered the motorized rifle regiment to prepare axes and saws for paving the road through the swamp and to ensure that the tank units would force the Setenka River. At sunrise the motorized rifle regiment dismounted, passed the empty trenches of General Carpizo's corps and stretched out through the forest in the direction of the crossings to occupy a bridgehead on the northern bank and cover the tanks crossing. After the motorized rifle battalions went and tank regiments. My company, as part of the reconnaissance battalion, moved along the road to Korolovka behind KB Vasiliev, as a reserve of the commander. Stopping at the river, we cover with fire a motorized rifle battalion preparing our crossing. Vasiliev looks out from behind the open turret hatch and hurries the commander of the motorized rifle battalion. He watches the village of Polnotsny on the opposite side of the river, shows us where to fire, and from time to time he shoots in that direction. From the second hatch of the turret the head of his loader, Regimental Commissar Nemtsev, often appears. Finally, the commander of the motorized rifle battalion runs to the chapel. So, the crossing is ready, I think, and exactly in confirmation of this, barely as soon as the commander ran up to the tank, as Vasiliev throws out the signal forward. From behind the village on the bridge densely struck mines. Over my head from somewhere on the right 2 shells snorted one after another. I ordered Gadyuchka to overtake Vasiliev's KB and skip ahead of him at high speed the open 300-meter section of the embankment and the bridge. Drive so that the shell did not take us over, explained my command Nikitin. Risk, of course, a big risk, because the worst shell from the Vickers gun will put my tank out of action, but we cannot allow that the division commander had to go into the attack ahead of us. By all means be on the other side first. I thought, bouncing and pounding against the walls of the turret of my light tank. The tank went crazy. From under the tracks far back flew the debris of timbers of the crossing deck. to the obvious displeasure of Nikitin, I had to reduce the stroke. My order was followed by the other 4 BTS, followed by 2 KBs of Vasiliev and HQ. To the left ahead in the trunk of a branching aspen tree a shell burst again. They took aim at us, I thought. But now, gentlemen Germans, it's too late, we've missed the bridge, and I ordered turn left. I drove the car into a young aspen thicket and kept watch along the road, which was suspiciously silent. Without leaving the thicket, almost at the bank of the swamp, I stop and watch the forest ahead, which hides the road to Komarovka, already familiar to me from reconnaissance. Looking back, I see tanks of Captain Mazayev's battalion crossing the swamp from the right. Suddenly, one and then the second anti-tank guns of the Germans hit them from the edge of the forest, which was not more than 300 or 400 meters away. Aha, lovebirds, opened up. Nikitin rejoiced. Now you are finished, and reaching to my ear, as if afraid that the Germans would hear him, whispered now with them, KB Vasiliev's KB will deal with them. And maybe we'll attack? I asked. No way, Comrade Commander. Stand still. He threatened me with his finger. Otherwise they will send us to our great-grandfathers at the sound of an engine. Dense aspen and willow trees covered us from the Germans and them from us. In order to attack them, we had to either go to the open road or, as blindfolded, wade through the thickets and run into the guns at point-blank range. Neither of those things suited us. Run, show the commander where the cannons are. The commander can see better from the road. Let him hit there from his, and then we will attack, I said to Nikitin, pointing at 2 KVs approaching us on the road. That's all he needed. Before I knew it, I saw Nikitin hunched behind the KB turret, showing Vasiliev where to shoot. But, to my surprise, no shots were fired. The KBS were gaining speed. Nikitin, who came running, reported. Kondiv is attacking and ordered us to follow him, not to linger near the swamp. Unpleasant remark, I thought, and giving the command to the others do as I do, went to attack the guns right through the aspen thickets. The KBS that were ahead on the road were hit by shells from somewhere in the woods. Coming out of the thicket at the edge of the forest, I saw Vasiliev's KB from the move, slightly raising its nose upwards, hitting a luxuriant bush, from under which 3 Germans ran into the forest. I did not have time to shoot at them, as an anti-tank gun hit the KB, from a growing bush ahead of it almost at point-blank range twice. With the engine roaring and gaining speed, Vasiliev's tank, slightly turning to the left, ran into the bush. 2 Germans jumped out from under the tank's blistered nose and, running aside, shaking their heads in surprise, shouted something, either Hochsch Pi IC or Oi Russ. What devils? Nikitin shouted to me, or not afraid or mad with fear. Now we'll see. I shouted Nikitin in response and hit the machine gun to cut off the Germans' escape route, and then hurried to Vasiliev's tank. Only now the Germans noticed us, but it was too late. Krivulia approached them from the other side, and they raised their hands in the air. Vasiliev, who was looking out of the turret, called me over. Tell you what, fly straight to the northern edge of the Leshnev forest. There you will find the Corps commander and report to him that I was in a bit of a hurry. I went to the attack an hour ahead of schedule, took the bridgehead. I am clearing the Komarova forest. Stay with the Corps commander until he comes to us. Then you'll bring him. I'll wait for his command on the northern edge of Komarova forest. It's also in the combat report, he said, handing me a sheet torn from the field book. And you are not wounded? I asked, noticing the dripping drops of blood and sweat on the colonel's sweaty face. No, it's the scale that bounces off the turret when the shell hits it, he explained to me. His eyes were shining. How happy he is now, I thought, and, glad that the commander is unharmed, drove the car to Leshnev. Today I was convinced that German guns are not afraid of KB, even if they hit it at point-blank range. Remember those Germans shaking their heads in amazement, and you say to yourself, yes, a good tank. It is a pity that we have only 10 of them per division. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning when I sought out the Corps command. General Rybyshev and Brigade Commissar Popel were standing to the right of the highway to Leshnev, on the northern edge of the forest in front of the swampy Slonovka River. To their right and left along the edge of the forest, from the village of Palov to the village of Pyaski, stood the tank regiments of Major General Mashanin's division, deployed in combat order. Having given the report and reported what I was ordered to do, I drove off, as instructed by the general, to the T-34 tanks lined up along the forest edge along the highway and along the northern edge of the village of Pyaski. From Leshnyov, German artillery was beating on the edge of the forest and the village. Lieutenant Colonel Volkov, the regimental commander, was running between the tanks, wearing a leather jacket hanging behind his back like a mantle. I heard the major accompanying him, probably the battalion commander, begging the lieutenant colonel to get out from under fire. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, I'll go around myself and give a second warning. Why should you risk it? Because they are shooting." The lieutenant colonel waved him away like a fly. "Dear, leave it. It is necessary that before the attack fighters and commanders saw each other. Mutual faith is needed, dear, bonding love." Running up to the car, he asked the commander looking out of the hatch, "Are we living cheerfully?" "Fun," he answered. "Good, baby, good." With the same and come from the battle. At the signal of the attack opened such a fire on your section that there and the devils became hot, not that the Germans. I was struck by how quickly the expression on the face of this tank commander changed from a few words that threw him with a smile, "Lieutenant Colonel." A minute ago he had looked out of the hatch with that connectedness and caution in his movements by which one can immediately sense that a man is under fire for the first time. He had been looking in the direction from which the enemy were firing, with apparent confusion, turning his head after each passing shell. And now he was smiling the same sparkling, happy smile as the regimental commander, as if that smile had flown from one face to the other. Sticking out of the turret up to his waist, confidently squaring his shoulders, calling out to the regiment commander, he said, "Yes, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel. I'm waiting for the signal." And then he shouts after him, "I'll give them such a fryer that they'll just hold on." Apparently very satisfied with his answer, he orders the loader prepare 10 shells for the fugitive. Lieutenant Colonel is already at the next tank. "Look, do not catch a Gorka." After the fire that the whirlwind flew over the bridge and broke into Leshnyov, and there smash everything you notice German. "Comrade Commander, I've been waiting impatiently for the signal for a year," slowly replied the junior lieutenant. He was half out of the turret with his mighty torso, leaning back a little, leaning on his arms bent at the elbows, and apparently did not pay the slightest attention to the flying shells. Next to him in the second hatch, only the small head of the loader could be seen, looking up at his commander from below and making hilarious grimaces. "What a yike!" Laughing, the lieutenant colonel turns his head. "Michi yike?" The commander of the car interrogates him in surprise. "It's incomprehensible, Comrade Junior Lieutenant Perepi Lip. That's what. I couldn't make out what you said." "Ah, Puls Perepelitsa. That you don't want to understand me. Give the signal to attack now, and you'll see how the Nimsi will understand me from beer." Without changing his posture, Perepelitsa replies. "Otherwise, just stand there and noodle." "Is Shilo here?" Volkov asked him. "Here, here, here." Instead of Perepelitsa, someone hastily answered, going up and down the tower. It was obvious that he was in a hurry and his feet were slipping off the stops. "Don't be in a hurry." Perepelitsa shouted at him. "Shilop, do you know the task?" Volkov asked. "That's right, I know to be the first to break into Leshnyov, to take Leshnyov and to advance." "I don't want to take it," Perepelitsa interrupted him. "You'd better load and watch me, and we'll take it with the crew, not you." This amused everyone, and Volkov, and the anxious major, and the company officer who ran up to them, and me and Nikitin. Already retreating to another car, Lieutenant Colonel warns Perepelitsa. "Look, Junior Lieutenant Perepelitsa, your car will be watched not only by me, but you might say the whole of Europe. Let's signal quickly, so that the whole USSR will be watching me, not just Europe. All right, I'll respect your request. I'll signal you soon. Happy success, said the lieutenant colonel. Thank you, answered Peripolitsa. Inside the car, his thank you, like an echo, repeated in three voices the rest of the crew, which we did not see. The attack is imminent. I drive up almost close to Ryabishev's KB, stopping behind him. Next to it stands Perpel's T-34. These two tanks, heavy KB and medium T-34, I always see them together as inseparable companions. By this pair, it is always easy to determine where the commander of the corps with his deputy in the political department. Now both the commander and his deputy are standing behind the stern of the Popolevsky tank. Ryabishev dictates a radiogram to the front headquarters, and Popol, looking through binoculars over the river, something marks on his map. Major General Mashanin, the division commander, who came up to us on a BT, reports to General Ryabishev about the readiness of the division to attack. Looking at his watch, Ryabishev says, Vasiliev more than an hour ahead of us, according to the plan and US time. Let's start, says Popol. General Mashanin, to your place, orders Ryabishev, and me and the brigade commissar will advance along the highway to Leshnyovy. General Mashanin ran away to his place, and I got out of the car and came to the stern of the KV. It will be a hot day, Popol said to himself, undoing the collar of his gymnasium jacket and flapping the hips of his leather jacket. It reminds me of the way the rooks flap their wings lazily and reluctantly on a hot summer day when they are driven from the field. Kaju, a lot of lard will be wasted, said Popol, turning to Ryabishev and wiping the sweat streaming from his face. Otherwise I would have used it for wheel ointment, for the cavalry probably have nothing to ointment the wheelbarrows now. This joke, said seriously, without a smile, made the frowning Ryabishev laugh. Look, comrade brigade commissar, as if the Germans hadn't melted all the lard off you today, then you'll really regret your losses, said the general. Anything can happen in war. Popol jokes. I give the signal of attack, again frowning, said Ryabishev, and calling the staff commander, ordered to give a signal by radio and rockets. In a minute, from all parts of our forest in the direction of the river flew red rockets, and in the forest roared tank engines. From somewhere from behind the woods, our corps artillery regiment hit Leshnyov. Around us, the guns of Volkov's tanks and the guns of the divisional artillery boomed loudly and often. Ryabishev and Popol raised binoculars to their eyes. Behind the bridge and the village, on its outskirts, in vegetable gardens and orchards, like soap bubbles, burst the whitish haze of frequent ruptures. To the right, a strange, square-shaped, tall tank emerged from the woods, stretching out with its horn toward the river, and marched quickly across the meadow toward the bank. Look, Mashanin has gone, said Popol, pointing to Ryabishev in the woods. Following the first tank came two more tanks of the same strange shape. What an obsession, I thought, looking at the first tank. The front part of it was rapidly shrinking, getting lower and lower. On the ground, one after another logs fell from the tank. Moving forward along them, he reached the river. When the logs stopped falling under the tracks, I saw that the tank had taken the shape of a BT. On the finished flooring, he quickly went back into the forest. In its wake followed another tank, waiting for its return. The third tank, not far away, was laying a road parallel to the one already laid. That's great, shouted Nikitin, also watching the battlefield from the turret, and apparently also only now realized what was happening in front of him. Popol turned around and, looking at Nikitin in surprise, asked him, What, Cloche, are you surprised? The first time you see, or what? For the first time, admitted Nikitin. Well, then learn how to force a swampy river, said Popol, and looked through binoculars where under fire through the swamp tank crossing. The second tank, which replaced the first, with a mountain of logs on its armour, went over the planking to the river, crossed over it, dropping logs, crossed the swamp, and, firing frequently, was already approaching the outermost barn of the village. Others were following his trail. Kirill Nikolaevich, your mechanics is good. I can't tell you how good it is. I doubted in vain, said Ryabishev, glancing at Popel, then again through his binoculars at the crossing. From this I concluded that Popel was the initiator of this way of forcing the swampy river. Having looked at the crossing, he turned away from it, as if it did not interest him at all, and began to look towards Leshniov, on the southern edge of Leshniov, which had been silent all the time. On the southern outskirts of Leshniov, which had been silent all the time, the small-caliber anti-tank artillery suddenly boomed with rolling volleying volleys to the right and left of the highway. It opened fire on the crossing of our tanks, to which was not less than 2 kilometers. Such a distance saved our light tanks, and their platoons quickly passed to the north bank of the river and burst into the neighbouring village. Ryabyshev does not turn binoculars from Leshniov. I hear him saying to Popel in a cheerful, satisfied voice, "There you see. That's where the Germans were waiting for us. Clearly they thought we'd rush along the highway first. Yes, gentlemen, they miscalculated. The Germans have already forgotten about the bridge, and the empty highway their artillery in a fever is making every effort to prevent our tanks from crossing the swamp, but it's too late. All these efforts are hopeless. The tanks that have crossed the swamp destroy the German guns on both sides of the highway with direct fire, disarming the direction of their attack. That's how well conceived, I think, gazing into the outskirts of the village. They began to notice the movement of hitherto invisible to us tanks and armoured vehicles, but now they disappeared behind the houses and gardens in the eastern direction. Comrade General, is it not time to flank?" Popel asked Ryabyshev. "It's time," replied Ryabyshev, and ordered the staff commander to pass the order to General Mishanin attack the village of Leshniov head-on along the highway. No sooner had Ryabyshev given his order than one T-34 tank flew along the highway, gaining more and more speed and firing at the bridge. At the bridge the tank slowed down. We, who were standing at the side, could see well how it cautiously, exactly by touch, crossed the bridge adjusted after the explosion and again, having drawn the highest motor note, flashed faster and faster in the gaps between the telegraph poles, swallowing the last dangerous kilometre of the highway. Perepelitsa. Nikitin shouts excitedly to me. "Yes, it's him," I say. Meanwhile, 3 tanks are already approaching the bridge, and from the forest on the highway burst out car after car. "The attack has begun," says Popel. He lowers the binoculars, triumphant, looks around, his face sparkles with that happy smile that I have seen on many faces today. "Yes, a good start," agrees Ryabyshev. The cannon fire on the north bank of the Slonivka River and in Leshniov suddenly almost stopped. But just when I thought, what does it mean, the firing resumed. Now it was conducted along the highway, and along the edge of the village, where our tanks were already there. The shells often furthered around us, and a curtain of continuous bursts began to grow near the bridge. "Hey, fools, it was too late to move the artillery," said Popel, addressing the general, and again raising the binoculars, added to himself, "Now Volkov will restore order there," and suddenly fell silent, stomped his foot with annoyance. "Damn it!" Ryabyshev swore almost simultaneously. Looking at the bridge, around which the Germans' barrage was raging, I realized what the matter was. Another tank flying along the highway, just before the bridge, abruptly slowed down and began to descend from the road embankment into the marshy meadow. His maneuver is clear to me. He wants to bypass the barrage fire in the swamp. But not having passed even 50 meters, the tank stalled on the place, and as if sat down in the grass. He put the car in the swamp, did not go through the fire, Popel resents. "I'm afraid, Comrade General, so that the rest of us don't get wise and put all the vehicles in the swamp." "Oh, wagged tail," he shouts. The second one, Comrade General, turned off the highway. "It's gone to hell in the swamp." Ryabyshev cursed and, lowering his binoculars, sighed like an old man. "Yes, Kirill Nikolaevich, remember the cavalry after all. When I commanded in full view of everyone saw me and did what I did. I think with horror that the other tanks will also try to bypass the bridge and of course get stuck in the swamp. Shivering like in a fever, I look at the superiors and get angry that the superiors are talking quietly and doing nothing. It seems to me that everything is already lost. Comrade General, let's go on the attack. Turning abruptly to Ryabyshev, Popel said, just like that, in full view of everyone. Let them see that the generals were the first to go through the fire. Everyone will follow us. I paid attention to Popel's uncharacteristic sharpness of movement and to the piercing, probing, but not without a cheerful, cunning look, which he threw at the general. It seemed to me that the general looked at Popel also somehow distrustful. Turning again to the bridge, after a little silence, he said in his usual agreeing tone, "Let's go." I did not suspect in the old general the agility with which he jumped up on his KB, giving the command to the cars, which was more like a long cavalry command to the horses, and the agility with which he threw his legs into the turret, just like a rider jumping off the saddle when jigging. "Mechanic, start it up," he shouted, leaning into the turret. "Run me in front of the formation at the edge of the forest in full view of everyone. The direction of attack along the highway, across the bridge to the village. Speed 3 crosses." Popel, too, was already on his T-34. Both tanks rushed forward, jumped out on the edge of the forest and, throwing up clods of forest earth, dragging behind them a veil of black smoke, rumbling and howling, carried both their commanders, and standing high in the turrets in full view of the crews of all the vehicles still firing from the spot. Continuously signalling with the do-as-I-do flag, Ryabyshev and Popel emerged onto the open highway. Here Popel's more dodgy and speedy car overtook Rybyshev's KB. What am I supposed to do now, I thought. "Let's go after them. Why are we lagging behind?" Nikitin shouted to me. Of course, after them I decided, climbing into the turret. Our BT barely broke out of the wave of tanks rushing to the highway, and like a hound on the trail, rushed after Ryabyshev and Popel, already approaching the bridge. The tanks rushing after us, blazing shots, formed a column on the highway. Well, now no barrage will not hold them back, I thought. To the German here. Nikitin formed a cross from 2 hands. With bated breath I followed Popel's tank, which, having slowed down, nodded its turret on the bridge and spat out a black-brown cloud of smoke, rushed into the thick of the barrage. It seemed to me that the flames of bursts dabbed at its sides and rear. The nose of the tank disappeared in a cloud of smoke and dust that rose from the ground. My breath caught. I tried to exhale air from my chest and could not. Missing Commissar, I probably thought that, but I felt as if someone had shouted it right in my ear. But then the cloud of bursts settled, and I saw Popel's tank. Already with its hatches closed, it was heading toward the village. Its speed seemed to be even greater. I breathed more freely. The cannon of Popel's tank, turned to the left, gleamed with the fire of a shot. "Alive!" I exclaimed mentally, and in an irrepressible burst of joy, slammed my palm on the turret with all my might and shouted to my tank. "Well, dear, take us out too." The barrage was dying down, but when Ryabyshev's tank also entered its lane, the bursts began to burst out of the ground with a new force. They rose up in a wall. We're too late a flight, I thought, paying attention to the fact that the ruptures cut off the general's car from me. "This one will pass," said Nikitin, and, slamming his hatch, shouted to me. "Close up, it's our turn." But I did not care about that. One thought replaced another. Only I thought if the shell hits the upper armor plates, our tank will not withstand. As the thought flashes that for the 3rd time I see ahead of the wall of ruptures, growing after a few seconds of silence, that Rybyshev's tank managed to skip before its appearance, so they hit in volleys. We must take advantage of the interval. Having cheered up, I shouted to Gadyuchka in the intercom. "Cross the bridge, bring the tank close to the ruptures, turn on the 3rd speed, turn off the onboard and be ready. I'll give the command full throttle, turn on the onboard and take it out of the fire. You got it?" I ask him again. "Arl," he answers. I resent that what? I yell. "Look, a shell will hit you on the nose, then it will be aha." Nikitin shouts to him. "Bashnur. Why are you shivering there?" Viper asks snidely. "Don't move my car, or I won't get to the bridge." You will look with your mouth, of course you will miss, coldly replies Nikitin. Do you think I am like your father's son? Snapped at the mechanic, already leaning against the triplex. Petty Officer Nikitin is listed as the commander of the machine, but in the battle I command, and he performs the duties of the loader, and the cunning Viper takes advantage of this, demotes Nikitin in 2 steps, and allows himself free treatment of him. But when Nikitin stays instead of me, enters into his rights as commander, the mechanic immediately imbues him with respect and honor, goes to you, and any joke made by Nikitin at his address, no matter how poisonous it was poisonous, swallows silently, without blinking. Bridge, warns Viper. I'm ready. At speed. The car stands. 50 meters ahead, explosions glisten. Forward. I give the command, and the tank jumps forward. I was thrown to the rear wall of the turret. The engine howled so hard that it seemed to be about to explode. My ears were pounding again, but the highway ahead was clear, with only occasional bursts up ahead. We overtook Ryabishev's KB and slowed down when we saw a T-34 smoking on the highway, with 3 men hastily working on its side. They were pulling the Caterpillar, trying to catch it on the teeth of the driving wheel. In one of them I recognized Popple. Come on, come on, come on! Or you'll get me too, he shouted, turning to us and keeping his pulling finger in his hand. 1 hoof is shot. It's nothing, nothing. They put 2 tracks. I'll catch up with you. Cunning. Nikitin laughs, pointing at the Commissar's smoking tank. I also thought at first that Popple's tank was on fire. It turns out that Popple put a smoke bomb on the stern, imitating a fire, and the Germans fell for the trick, stopped firing at him, deciding that this tank is already finished. When we approached the first courtyards of the village, from somewhere on the right we were met by fire of anti-tank guns, but it was the last battery, and Junior Lieutenant Perepolitsa was already crushing it with his tanks, the first who had jumped over the bridge. The commander of the tank, left by Perepolitsa on the highway to cover the bridge, informed us that on the northern outskirts of the village, at the highway to Beresteko, and on the western outskirts, at the highway to Sakharovis, the Germans were preparing for a tank counterattack. Now everything depends on Volkov's regiment. It must, without wasting a minute, strong groups to break out on both highways and prevent the enemy from using them to bring reinforcements to the Germans defending in Leshnuva. The enemy's fire intensifies. Volkov and his column passes us, and his tank split into 2 parts. Popyal's tank goes with him. Well, Comrade General? Asks Rybyshev Popyal, smiling enigmatically from his turret. Attack the northern outskirts, answers Rybyshev, whose tank is standing next to us. I see. Mechanic forward. Commands Popyal. General Rybyshev's KB goes next to Popyal's tank along the street in the direction of Beresteko. I'm following the KB, pressing up against the houses. Volkov's tanks are moving along the right side of the street, and he himself is somewhere among them. One after the other 2 shells whistled nastily. From there. Popyal shouted to Rybyshev, pointing with his hand to a stone house standing at the crossroads behind the church. Behind us the street was blocked by a wall of explosions, just as at the bridge. New batteries have appeared, I thought. Now the shells howled above us ceaselessly. Here and there a cloud of red dust rose above the stone house, and broken tiles rang, or long chips flew from the log walls. Comrade Senior Lieutenant, Nikitin says to me, let's turn behind the houses into the vegetable gardens and follow them to the edge of the village. The Commissar has already slammed the hatch, they are now to the side, and we will not have good luck. Popyal, indeed, has shut the hatch, he is rushing, clinging to the houses. You see, this cunning Commissar is up to something and will get it to our nuts. Nikitin doesn't stop. Popyal attacks the battery, Nikitin is right, we need to cover the houses, and go next to him, I decided, and gave the command to turn left behind the houses. Breaking fences and wattles, we catch up with Popyal's tank. He walks beside it down the street and shoots somewhere. Ahead, behind the houses on our side of the alley, a heavy cannon armoured car is sneaking up on Popyal, its white cross branding flashing in the gaps between the houses. Nikitin grabs another armor-piercing shell. I hurry to aim the cannon at the first gap between the houses. Here he is, my dove, I said to myself, aiming the crosshairs at the middle of the armoured car and anticipating the pleasure of how now I will pierce it through. But at that moment a cannon boomed from behind us, and the armoured car with the side of the vehicle blown off came to a stop. Looking out of the turret, I saw a T-34 tank firing nearby, with Popel's head hidden in its turret before my eyes. Nikitin, holding the now unnecessary shell at the ready in his hands, scolded admiringly. Damn it. He managed to do it here too, I noticed. What a hawk's eye. A company of T-34s was already moving along our heels, firing guns. Through the alley in the end garden we could see the Germans running. From there came dry drumming shots. Germans. Infantry. Impatiently shouted to me Nikitin. Hurry. They will go away. Having shot at some hole into which the soldiers jumped, I having burst into the garden, pouring from the machine gun in all directions, and Viper unfolds the tracks of the trenches. In different directions from us run German soldiers. Some of them fall, others manage to run to the high rye. Nikitin counts the mortar barrels turned out of the pits by the caterpillars and the boxes of mines lying everywhere. Our task is accomplished, he solemnly announces. Now we have to find the lost superiors. But we don't have to look for our superiors. Here in the middle of the neighbouring garden on the right is Ryabishev's KB, next to another tank it must be Popier's. They are beating from the guns along the highway on the Germans' armoured cars, or tanks going behind the ridge. The tanks of the neighbouring regiment, which are visible on the same ridge far to the right, are also firing there. On the left, somewhere beyond the village, the battle was also rattling. I drove up to the tank of the Corps Piconde. General Ryabishev, having risen on the turret of his KB, was watching through binoculars, alternately turning in all directions. Popel, a young man, a balloon, jumping out of the car, with a satisfied look wiped his hand with a smouldered and dirty face. The success of the offensive is evident, says the general from the tower, without taking his eyes off the binoculars. Undoubtedly. Popel echoed from below. General Meshanin, the division commander, came up on a tank. He reported that the village had been cleared of the enemy, and that on the right and left our units were advancing, and that in this battle the enemy had lost 3.5 light tanks and armoured cars, up to 2 batteries of artillery and many mortars. And rifles? Ryabishev asked. I don't know, Comrade General. They haven't reported to me. You see, what kind of war we're fighting? I myself during the whole battle did not hear a rifle shot, all guns, mortars, machine guns, that's why I asked, said Ryabishev. He ordered to pursue the enemy without stopping to Berestikok, to take the defence along the river Styr. Already after the departing commander Ryabishev shouted, My NP is here. Look, keep in touch by radio. When along the highway to the north in a deployed formation went tanks, in the sky appeared several German planes. They were flying very low, near the ground, looking for something, but they were not firing, and nobody was firing at them. Everyone was busy with the offensive, and the offensive continued. Ryabishev got off the tank and approached Popel. By the smiling faces it is clear that both are very pleased with the first success. Now they look directly into each other's eyes, treat one another with cigarettes. Now there is no longer noticeable that wariness in their glances, with which they looked at each other before the attack, and which was guessed then in their every word. Well, Nikolai Kirillovich, have you shot anything? Asks Ryabishev. I think so, says Popel. I fired twice at the white crosses between the houses, but I never got to see the results. Shot down. I couldn't resist. The armoured car was wrecked. A heavy one, with a cannon. Nikitin added from the turret. Well, all the same. Although it is heavy, but this, my dear, respected Nikolai Kirillovich, is the same as from the hunting 4th caliber wolf buckshot at a sparrow. How can your gun be spoiled for such a small thing? It can't be helped, Dmitri Ivanovich, as the fisherman is, So is the fish, Popple joked, evidently alluding to his small stature. I am, a man without pretensions, whatever I get. I will not refuse. That's a good principle. With a satisfied shake of his head, said Ryabyshev. Dmitry Ivanovich, confess, and why did you agree to go into the attack? Popple asked. Apparently this question for Ryabyshev was not unexpected, because he grinned and, looking Popple in the eyes, said, Because you and I are new people, we do not know each other yet. Is that clear? Quite, said Popple. In that case, Nikolai Kirillovich, let's not test each other any more, and I don't advise you to take any more risks like today through the barrage. Good that it was mortar, yes, and caliber battalion, and if it would have been artillery, hardly got away with one caterpillar. So it was mortars, that's what it was, and I thought it was artillery, I thought disappointedly. I'm not familiar with mortars yet. I'll have to take a closer look. Ryabyshev tried for a long time to contact our division by radio. He kept asking the radio operator, Well, does Vasiliev's radio work? No, it doesn't work, he answered from the tank. Vasiliev fails me. Ryabyshev was angry. When you come to the division, seeing me, Popple said, do not forget to tell Colonel Vasiliev to investigate why his radio does not work, the culprit to be punished, and so that long remembered. Repeating the order, I drew the attention of my superiors to the fact that to the right of us ahead, 10 kilometers to the northeast, often burst bombs and see how behind the gardens then disappear large swarms of planes in the smoky haze of the sky. It seems that the commander is fighting, I suggested. Maybe he is now also ahead of his battle order. Involuntarily escaped me. I kind of continued what I was thinking about all the time, listening from behind my tank to the conversation between Ryabyshev and Popple. By the surprised and wide-open eyes looking at me, I realized that the general guessed that I had heard his conversation with Popple. He grumbled unhappily, cocked his head back, suddenly frowned, flashed a barbed glance, and said a long yes, turned to Popple, who was busy with something, and suggested that he go back into the woods to Brody, to the CP. We'll try to contact via the main radio, he explained his intention and ordered me to follow him. Now the shoals of German bombers were floating above us. Having turned around, they went, descending, to the north to Korolovka, where the tanks of Mashanin's division were moving. Explosions were already coming from there. It was clear that the Germans, having discovered the direction of our offensive, are taking measures to help their fleeing light armoured division and stop the advance of our corps. General Ryabyshev's attempt to catch our division from the main radio of the corps headquarters, where we had arrived since an hour, had not yet yielded the desired results. I am standing by my tank on the edge of a sparse forest and waiting for the next order. Here, on the edge of the forest, in 200 metres huddled vehicles of the corps headquarters, near which a whirlpool of approaching and departing liaison vehicles. German bombers are flying over us, and somewhere to the right nearby bombs are deafeningly bursting. Jumping out of the forest, I see that the Germans are bombing the edge of the forest, where the headquarters of General Baranov is located. Our forest is bombed? Nikitin asks me. Ours. Hold on, guys. Now we will get a trochee from this dog wedding. For some reason with gloating, says Viper, sitting on the nose of the car, and lowered his legs inside his hatch. Hey, Oracle, hold your tongue, or the first bomb will tear it off, advises Nikitin. And what is this Oracle? Viper is interested. It in Athens once was such a chief liar, laughs Nikitin. I foresee that Viper is about to start with a half a turn. Junkers, threateningly, he says, raising his finger to the sky, and he himself is already looking into the hatch. Somewhere far away to our left, a bomb exploded, and another one whistled quite close to our right. Aha, Oracle, you liar, shouts Viper, who had time to dive into the car and shut the hatch. Get your university cough pack by the turret, Comrade Loader, or you'll lose it. The Viper doesn't stop, but Nikitin doesn't care about him anymore. Look, all run from the forest to the field. He reports his observations. Damn it, gave themselves away, now they will hit the edge. Hearing this, Gadiuchka, forgetting everything that was before, shouts to me from below and, as always in such cases, already in pure Russian. Comrade Commander, deeper into the forest. Since the people are from the forest, let's go deeper into the forest. They will not bomb the whole forest. Let's try, offers Nikitin. I agree, and only our car started to move, as not far to the left began to burst bombs in packs. Explosions quickly approached us, driving our mechanic. The tank went, wiggling between thick trees. The forest rumbled, groaned, and crackled. When everything quieted down, we walked through the mangled forest back to the headquarters. Broken headquarters cars were smoking, like white doves, and the glade was strewn with sheets of headquarters documents. I run up with Nikitin to the broken car, from which the antenna is sticking out. Nearby General Rybyshev rises from the funnel and, taking his head, bent and staggering, goes to another large funnel, in which behind two thick piled trees Popple bandages someone's head. Nikolai Kirillovich, are you all right? Asks Rybyshev. Huh? Popple interrogates him in a muffled voice. All right, I say. Of course, smiles Popple. A little scratch on the crumbs, he shows, and some thistle in my head, but otherwise nothing. And how are you, Dmitry Ivanovich? He asks the Shev, sitting down on the edge of Ryaba's funnel. Did you make a mark too? The medics run up and take away the wounded. Popple looks at the wrecked staff cars, shakes his head sadly, says, the day is beginning to spoil. Already spoiled, interrupts him Rybyshev. The main radio is shattered, the others are mangled. Only one from the operations department is left. Then there's nothing to sit around for. Let's go to Vasiliev, Popple suggests. Rybyshev orders me to lead them. No sooner had we left, as the headquarters began to dive on the newly appeared swarms of planes. During the first bombing, hiding in the woods, we did not see how much aviation above us, but now, from the road, wherever you look, everywhere there are swarms of planes, everywhere both far and near explosions. There is a large tract of forest burning, there are 2 groves smoking. There is a continuous crackling in the rumble of explosions. These are the explosions of the vehicles with fuel and ammunition that are densely packed in the groves. It is good that these cars were not on the highway, or it would be impossible to pass through it. At the smoking groves, the spots of burnt-out green grass attract attention. We stop and look at them. Phosphorus. Popple determines. Liquid phosphorus is watered, that's why the forest is burning. The bright sunny day became yellow and dim, like during an eclipse. Near Chervonomysk we are attacked by Messerschmitts. I leave the highway behind the houses. Rybyshev follows my example. Where's Popple? We didn't even notice how he fell behind on his T-34.